Show 1 was for the defense of the Philippines. Show 2 for Formosa, the Ryukyus, and southern Japan. Show 3 for central Japan, and Show 4 for the north. In fact, the Japanese were nearly certain that the American attack would be launched against the Philippines. But wherever the assault, it would trigger the convergence of all available Japanese forces, naval units, land-based air power, and amphibious infantry units. Under the onslaught, the American invasion force would be overwhelmed and completely annihilated. Admiral Chester Nimitz had been appointed Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet in December 1941, shortly after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. More than anyone, it was Nimitz who had restored the morale and offensive spirit of the Pacific Fleet in the aftermath of the disaster. The Pacific Theater had traditionally been the special preserve of the United States Navy and the undisputed domain of the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. However, since the start of the war with Japan, the Army had also been heavily committed, mainly because of the need to defend Australia and New Zealand. The seal was set on increased Army influence when General Douglas MacArthur, regarded as a hero by the American press and public, set up his headquarters in Australia. The result was an extraordinary arrangement in which MacArthur was given command of the Southwest Pacific region and Nimitz the Central Pacific. Nimitz did his best to ensure that this unprecedented division of command should have a chance of working. However, no amount of tact on the part of the Pacific Fleet Chief could change the dangerous reality. In the Philippines operation, there would be no overall American commander. Admiral Soemu Toyoda was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Combined Fleet in March 1943. A widely experienced and able leader, Toyoda had been one of the many naval officers who had opposed the war right from the start. What was more, he had disagreed with the strategy that had been adopted, believing that Japan's plans for conquest were far too ambitious. A one-time chief of the Naval Technical Department, responsible for ships and equipment, Toyoda was well able to appreciate the dire situation in which Japan now found herself. Toyoda had always advocated the strategy of provoking a decisive battle to destroy the American Pacific Fleet. In spite of previous failures, he believed that Japan now had even less choice than before. With the show plans, Admiral Toyoda meant once more to try to inflict such a defeat on the Americans that they would be compelled to come to terms. His forces were weaker than ever, but if his fleet and his aircraft were used skillfully and boldly, he might yet win an historic victory. The Philippines invasion would involve almost the whole of the United States Pacific Fleet, and in preparation, the force was temporarily reorganized. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet was stripped of its amphibious and transport elements, and these were given to Seventh Fleet, which would carry out the actual landings. That still left Halsey with a formidable strike force to protect the invasion. Task Force 38 had nearly 1,000 aircraft on 17 fast carriers, along with a powerful escort of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. As an attack force which could undertake operations thousands of miles from any major base, Task Force 38 was unique. The Pacific Fleet's supply system was now so good that the task force could stay at sea almost indefinitely. The At-Sea Logistics Group, an armada of 34 oilers, storeships, refrigerator ships, and ammunition ships, replenished the carrier groups at a series of pre-arranged rendezvous. Replacement aircraft and crew were delivered by 3 escort carriers, while 8 others provided anti-submarine and combat air patrols for the supply ships. The logistics group also had its own protective screen of 19 destroyers and 26 destroyer escorts. While Third Fleet had grown in nearly 3 years of war to become the most powerful naval force afloat, Seventh Fleet had traditionally been the poor relation. Created in March 1943 to support MacArthur's campaigns in the Southwest Pacific, for most of its life it had been a modest force of submarines, troop transports and escorts under Admiral Thomas Kinkaid. Now, however, in the build-up to the Leyte invasion, it was becoming one of the largest fleets ever assembled. Of the 700 vessels now assigned to Seventh Fleet, almost a quarter were warships. As well as his original fleet and his amphibious forces, Admiral Kinkaid had Task Force 77, the powerful force of battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and escort carriers, which would provide close protection for the invasion fleet and fire support for the landings. The Essex Fleet carriers, the first of which was launched in July 1942, were at 27,000 tons the biggest American carriers yet. With a top speed of 33 knots, they were also the fastest. The Essex carriers could operate an air group of 82 aircraft and carry nearly 250,000 gallons of aviation fuel. A massive array of anti-aircraft guns gave the Essex carriers the ability to put up a powerful defense against enemy air attack. The carriers had 12 5-inch radar-controlled guns, 40 40mm guns, and 60 30mm weapons. Although the flight deck was not protected by armor, the hangar below was, and it would detonate a bomb before it reached the ship's core. By October 1944, 13 Essex-class carriers had been completed. Of these, 7 would take part in the Battle at Leyte Gulf. The first of the Colorado-class battleships had been launched as far back as 1920. The ship's